Welcome everyone to the workshop of the BCBA as an effective supervisor of RBTs and BCBA trainees. This workshop is going to cover many different topics, specifically techniques for maintaining supervisor relationships, improving supervisee outcomes, and different techniques and practical tips on how to become an effective supervisor. Welcome. There are many different topics to cover today. For those that are joining us, I'm sure some of you are looking to cover your hours, but I believe that many of you will become supervisors, as is something that BCBAs do, and many trainees constantly need that input, as well as RBTs. So it's not only if you think in the future you will become a supervisor, but when training RBTs, registered behavior technicians, you will have that opportunity to train, and I believe that we can learn together throughout this workshop and become more effective supervisors. So let me first introduce myself. My name is Chani Weissmandel. I've been in the special education field, I would say, for close to 12 years as of right now. I started as a special education teacher. First, I went to school. I believed very strongly that I was going to be in the general education world. I wanted from early on to become a teacher. My mother till this day will tell everyone that I always said I would be a principal. But early on, when I started going for my degree and I went into I was getting my master's, I automatically was being drawn to special education. And I right away went for a dual master's degree. I got a dual degree in general education and special education. And then when I went for my field work for special education, I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the students and the challenges and everything that comes with it. I saw that I had a little bit of a specialty in behavior management, not necessarily knowing what the whole ABA world was and the whole BCBA world was, but I definitely felt that I had, I saw myself drawn to this part of special education. So I, right away after getting my master's, my first job was in a special education public school called the Curious Stroll Public School, which is in Monroe, New York. And I became a special ed teacher in preschool. Interestingly enough, when I went for my interview, I told everyone that I wanted to be working with older students. I felt that I could have a little bit more of an impact, and they said the only position they had was in preschool. And I jumped right in, and then I didn't want to leave preschool. I was a special education teacher for about 7 years. About my second year, the BCBA that was working in our school came over to me and said, "You're new, you're fresh, you're brand new." The school didn't really have a real ABA department. It didn't really have, she was actually hired the same year that I was hired. And she felt that we need to train some of the teachers. We need to have classes that had mainly, that the classes were really directed only to students that needed ABA. She asked if I would be interested to take the training and become a BCBA. And I actually jumped right in. I didn't really have that much knowledge of it. Where I went to school for my master's didn't really focus at all on ABA. They focused a lot on having special education more of an inclusive settings, how that would look like. I felt that I really learned hands-on when I went for my field work. That's when I really got that excitement for working with the more challenging field of special education, the lower functioning, the behavior challenge, those with problem behaviors. So that's where I really jumped right in. But when this BCBA came over to me together with the principal, they guided me, they gave me the training, they really helped me see that I had the potential in this. And that's where it really all began. It was interesting because the classroom that I had then was a mix of students, some that really just needed general path of special education curriculum, and some that needed the more intense ABA methodology. So I felt that I was really practicing hands-on with the students in my room. I had assistants, as we call them, paraprofessionals, that helped me, that guided me, that really, not necessarily guided me, but really worked together with me. We were a team. And it was a great experience. The BCBA that guided me to this day is someone that I look up to, someone that I feel really gave me so much and shaped me into the BCBA that I am today. And I feel that a lot of what I give over to other BCBAs is what she taught me and how she molded me. And that's part of what I would like to do with you today. But before we get there, I continued working at the Carrier Public School. That BCBA eventually left our school. I think she went, she is running an agency at this point, and she recommended that I take over her position. And I was in her position for a couple of years. What was challenging about that position was that my school didn't have many BCBAs on staff. And as you can imagine, the Carrier Public School is a public school of about 20 classrooms from preschool all the way to the age of 21. And there were many behavioral challenges, and there were many students that were on the spectrum, many students that needed ABA as a part of their curriculum. And we just did not have enough BCBAs to cover all of that. It was a very challenging time, and there was even a moment where I didn't know how to be able to reach all of the students, being one BCBA in a school of many students with many different challenges. Besides for that, teachers needed support in behavior management, just that's it. Behavior management strategies in their classroom as a whole. And then there were the specific students, and then there were the very low functioning students. And then there were very high functioning students that just had behavioral issues. So there were many different challenges. During those years, I created something called the ABA Center in our building, where students would come out of their classrooms, because part of what we had was really a mixed classroom type, where there were higher functioning students and lower functioning students in one classroom. And what we had was the students come out to the ABA Center, and in the ABA Center was where we trained those paraprofessionals. We worked one-on-one. I was able to go to that one room and have all those students there. And we put a lot of effort into training the students. We integrated a sensory program together with a few occupational therapists who had that experience, and that they had a whole repertoire of sensory, processing. They were really able to implement a lot. And besides for that, we also had occupational therapists that were trained in floor time that were able to integrate that as well. Not as separate methodologies, but really to combine all of it together. And from there, I then opened up different supplemental programs where students that needed just to work on their functional skills, their ADL skills, they went out to a lab called the Skills Lab, where they worked on very simple skills of sorting and anything of that. Really, if they might have challenges with fine motor skills, but at least they were able to do something. And they were functional skills that would eventually be able to help them if they would take on some vocational work. So we had recreational groups that we started, as well as a calming room to really help our students to calm them down. So we had the different parts of sensory, which was the alerting, the recreational groups, which was the regulation, and then the calming part of things. So we really targeted all of it. And throughout all that, I think, we then hired more BCBAs that joined our staff, really wonderful BCBAs that had that same outlook as all of us, and really held on to the vision that we all had, that we still have. And in the interim, I became assistant principal here at the Carrier Public School. And I think it's the first time in probably special education history where a BCBA is in that kind of position. But I think it allows me a very specific viewpoint in our school where, I've had that experience in the classroom where I'm able to support teachers with academics, but also support teachers with behavioral issues and guide them to the BCBAs and really help them, take their classrooms to the next level. So besides for doing all this, I did have opportunities to work for agencies in the meantime before I became assistant principal, when I probably had a little bit more time. And in that time, I feel that I was really able to gain experience in supervising RBTs, paraprofessionals, and other BCBA trainees, both at an agency as well as in my school. Specifically in an agency, I would say that I've had the experience I've worked with paraprofessionals who are getting their BCBA license, so I had to do that dual training, as well as in my school, there are many times that teachers come in and they would like to, they're going for their BCBA degree, and that gives them, they want to work in our school because they will have that supervision, on staff, and they get the hands-on experience, which is wonderful and amazing. And they're really able to gain the experience that they can, the utmost what they can get as a supervisee and as a trainee, as a BCBA trainee. So I've actually worked with many teachers, many supervisees, and I hope that my experience that I have in working in the school as well as in agencies can help you as the learner today gain some insight and bring the next great BCBA into the BCBA world. So let's get started. So today's objectives are to guide BCBAs that are supervising BCBAs in training and RBTs to gain guidance on how to establish and maintain supervisory relationships, to understand how to train BCBAs and ensure that at the end of the day they are effective, to learn how to use best practices and principles of behavior to guide and supervise BCBAs in training, and to learn techniques in how to provide useful feedback and self-evaluations. I think this is the overall objectives that we have today, and I hope that we will be able to really gain the right insight that we can in how to really reach all of these objectives. So I'm going to ask everyone to think about this question that I have for you. Take a few minutes. I want everyone to really just think back onto their experience that they've had with their supervisor and name the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of your fieldwork experience. Take a minute, think about it. You may have had more than one supervisor, your fieldwork experience. I'm sorry. You may have had, a few of those, but really think back at the one that sticks out the most in your mind. It could be a positive one, it could be a negative one, but I want you to have that piece in your mind and really keep that there for as long as you can. And I'm also going to think back to my fieldwork experience, and I could tell you that the piece that sticks out in my mind is that my supervisor wanted the best outcome for me. She was there to make sure that I would become the best BCBA possible. And I felt that in everything she did. It was in the time that she gave me. It was in how she guided me. It was in the space that she gave me to learn. That's what I felt from her. I knew that she was going to make me the best BCBA. That's how I felt. She was going to make sure that I was going to get all the training I needed, the extra training. She always made sure to put me first. She listened, gave me the time. And even after I became a BCBA, she was always available to talk and answer questions. And that's how I knew that I really had a relationship with her. So that's something that stuck out in my mind. And the reason I want you all to think about it is it should guide you in how you become a supervisor. If it's that negative experience, you're not going to do that. If it's that great positive experience that you have had, and that this is something that I know that I want to be just like her, I want to train the next BCBA just like her or him, that was an experience that you are really going to make sure and use as an example in when you're supervising. So recently, what I had done is I sent out a survey to different BCBAs, and I wanted to know how effective was your supervisor. Now, I am attaching the link to that Google form that, you are more than welcome to fill out. I'd love to hear your feedback. I would love to hear your responses, but I wanted it to give me a little bit of an idea of different BCBAs out there. And the first responses that I got were from BCBAs that I personally knew, and I knew what great BCBAs they are. But it allowed me a glimpse into how their fieldwork was and how it guided them in the BCBAs that they are today. And some of these questions are, geared to what is the type of experience, supervision you experienced. Was it one-on-one supervision? Was it a group supervision? Timing questions. How often did you meet with your supervisor? Did the supervisor have enough time for you? Did they make themselves available for you? What were some challenging aspects of your fieldwork experience? What were some enjoyable aspects of your fieldwork experience? Was your fieldwork experience that was so relatable and beneficial that it really guides you into what you do today in behavior analysis, no matter where you are. If you're working for an agency, you're working at home, you're working in a school, you're working in groups, whatever the case may be. Is it something that gave you that experience that you needed and it still guides you today? Did the supervisor, was she able to give you reasons behind the different, programs that were implemented? Was she able to answer any questions that you had? She or he. Maybe there's something that you would do differently as a supervisor. Any advice that you would give to a future supervisor? So these are some of the questions that I had asked, and I got some very, very interesting questions, and I would love it if you would take a minute or two to fill that out. And we're going to come back to this at the end of the workshop because I want to bring it full circle at the end. But think about these questions as we go through the workshop and as we go through the different points and helpful tips on how to really become an effective supervisor and what you need to do to train your supervisee, your BCBA in training, that RBT. Think about some of these questions and let that guide you throughout, okay? So if you want to take a minute now to fill that out or open it up, take a quick peek at it, see what it looks like. And, obviously I just put on, some bullet points up here on the PowerPoint, but there are many more questions, and it may help you and may give you that little bit of that focus on where it should be as we learn together throughout this workshop. So before we go on, I read a very interesting article by Sellers, Valentino, Landon, and Aiello, if I pronounced that name correctly, but something that they had said in their research really struck a chord with me. And basically, the authors surveyed about 400 participants and found that 75% of these participants said that they were responsible for supervising others. But they did feel that they did not get enough training on how to be effective supervisors. And I thought that was very, very interesting. We understand that there's so much, there is a lot of available training for effective supervisory practices. Obviously, when we're going for our CEUs or when we're taking these trainings, we do need to take courses in supervision. We do need to make sure that we're getting those credits in supervision. And the reason for that is because we're in a field where we are constantly supervising, and we need to make sure that we have that under our belts, that we are really giving the best, we're giving our all, and we're making sure that we're really training this next generation of BCBAs into the best BCBAs. So if supervisors are charged, with training and providing feedback to trainees, and those supervisors are not trained in effective strategies for teaching and performance management, there is a huge increased risk that trainees will develop incomplete or faulty repertoires. And that is something mind-boggling to understand, that if we are not doing our job because we have not been trained effectively, then what do we expect from those that are being trained? So step number one is making sure that we have effective strategies to use, that we are becoming really effective supervisors so that our trainees can then become great BCBAs, and then they themselves become effective supervisors. So it's definitely a cycle that we have to really make sure we are starting off with really great and effective strategies. So with that thought in mind, let's think about what actually is supervision. So I ask you to think about a definition of supervision. What do we think about when we actually really define, when we give that definition of supervision? So I looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and I think that supervision gets confused with training, and not that they're separate things. They really are, part of what we do. But the overall definition of supervision is the act of overseeing. It's inspection, which is what we do. However, as a BCBA supervisor, you are training as well. And training is an activity that leads to skilled behavior. So a BCBA supervisor is not only what the definition of a supervisor is, they are also someone that is training. So as a supervisor, what you are going to be doing is your supervision may involve training in new skill sets. You're going to discuss behavioral procedures. You're going to oversee the implementation of previously learned skills. You are going to train them in behavior management. You are going to model and making database clinical decisions. There are many, many activities that you are going to be doing throughout your supervision career that is going to be both training and both supervision, because you need to do both. It's not enough just to train and just to give them all that training, but then you have to do the supervision part. And how do we oversee and how do we inspect, as the definition says? Well, we're going to talk about it throughout this workshop, how we do that. But the key word we're going to think about is going to be feedback. But we're going to talk about that a little bit later. I believe very strongly that supervisors, BCBA supervisors, have a goal in mind. And they should have one goal in mind. And that is, are we just trying to get a good BCBA out of our trainees? Or do we want to get a great BCBA? And I believe that we need to have that razor sharp focus and saying, it's not enough that my BCBA is going to walk out of our supervisor, our fieldwork experience, the relationship that we are going to set up together. They are not going to leave as a good BCBA. They're going to leave as a great BCBA. And a great BCBA is not easy to come by. And sometimes we do have to make the decision to say that they may not go too far, or they didn't get enough. And that could be something that you may have to explain to them at the end, which is, you need to do a little bit more in this field, in this part, in this area, and hope for the best. And sometimes you do need to have a talk with them and saying, I can't see you do A, B, or C if you do not take more training in A, B, or C. I remember once I did have a teacher that was a trainee, and he had a little bit of a personality that was a little bit more quieter, a little bit more, I wouldn't call him the social butterfly. However, he did have teachers and he did have people that he worked with that really related to him and really felt that they were able to talk to him and gain something from him. So I had a little bit of a talk with him and I said, listen, you have assistants in your classroom, and I need to see that you would be able to lead them and able to coach them in the proper way in order to believe that this is what you will be able to do when you are, for example, working in an agency or working as a BCBA in a school building, and you need to constantly go and coach and teach and train and supervise and make sure that people are carrying through in programs and behavioral procedures. I need to know that you can do that. And it was very hard for this teacher. I'm not going to say that, it was an easy task. And I can't say he ever got there, honestly. I think that it was something that was challenging for him because it was really a part of his personality, and he wasn't able to really get past that piece of, having that personality to really make sure to, get his point across in an effective way instead of allowing people to dictate back to him. And that actually, he didn't necessarily, I think he got 1 or 2 jobs in agencies, and I think got very simple cases. There's room for everyone, but obviously, we do want to make sure we're getting out those great BCBAs. So what makes a good BCBA versus what makes a great BCBA? I think that everyone, a lot of this could be opinion based. It definitely does not have to be that it's fact. But from my experience, I can definitely say that, we have a very challenging population that we're working with. And it's not enough to just have mediocre. We need to have great BCBAs. So we definitely want those BCBAs that are personable, that they are relatable, that you can talk to, that people will want to interact with. When I did my survey, one of the answers were about their supervisor was that they wished that their supervisor was a little bit more relatable to them. And they felt that their supervisor didn't take that time to really make sure that they were, friendly. Just a simple word as friendly. I think that we do need to make sure that we are, as supervisors, if we're relatable and we're friendly, that's what we're showing to our trainees. And we want them to become that way as well. They have to constantly interact with people. There's so many people that they're interacting with throughout their experience, throughout when they're going to actually be in the behavior analysis world, and they need to be relatable. The parents need to be able to relate to them and to want to implement what they're asking them to do at home. Teachers have to want to implement what they're asking them to implement in the classrooms, as well as paraprofessionals, RBTs will want to actually learn from them. It's not enough for a BCBA. You can have a BCBA walk into a room and have great and wonderful ideas, but if they can't actually get you to implement them, they're actually worthless. And we want to make sure that they are, coming across and that people want to please them. And I think us all as BCBAs, we're definitely in situations and challenging situations where we may have an experience where we're asking for very challenging things for the parent to do. You might walk into a home where the parent has many, many different children that may be challenging, and this one specific student or client that you're coming to work with, and you're saying to the parent, I need you to follow this schedule and to make sure that this procedure is being implemented, and to, and obviously you're saying it in a empathetic way, and you're working together with them. But if we want them to actually do it, you want to make sure you have a relationship with them, an ethical relationship, but that it's one that they will want to please you and they will want to carry it out. So you need to be relatable in that fact. And that's what we need to mold our BCBAs into becoming. So giving them that hands-on experience, you want to make sure, any BCBA that comes to you, they have that hands-on experience. They have that real world experience. Something that I've heard so much, and I feel like we've all heard it as BCBAs, which is BCBAs can sometimes be in the box and sometimes out of the box. And what I mean by that is that a lot of times, obviously we want to make sure that whatever we're doing is ethical, whatever we're doing follows the principles of behavior. It actually, there's a procedure, it has that antecedent, the behavior, it has everything that really makes it, analytical. But what I believe is that it's okay that sometimes, we have to see, how can we make this work? What am I going to do in order to make sure that it's going to be carried out in that way? And if we get very, very, one-sided, and we can't see anything in our peripheral vision, and we only have that one goal in mind, and eventually you start seeing that people start dropping off on the wayside because what you're saying is so completely, out of what they can actually see, you're not really going to get anywhere. And what I've seen is that, BCBAs can be either extremely detail oriented or only seeing the full picture, but not both. And I think we have to really we have to see all of that, because if we don't and we can't, then we start losing the trust of people around us. And especially I think in a school environment where there's so many different variables in place, you have to be able to see all those variables and say, okay, if this is not going to work, let's come up with a plan to see how we can make it work. Let's start from we'll work on the behavior that's the easiest and then work our way up to the hardest, or the one that's the most not safe and then work to the ones that are safer. Really coming up with a good plan, but we have to give that over to our BCBAs and not say it's my way or the highway. I've been in many, many situations where I've sat in meetings with a BCBA from the home environment. Myself was, let's say, with the BCBA from the school environment, with the teacher, with the parent, and the BCBA at home, for example, saying, this is the only method for us to use with this child, wouldn't even give the research to back it up, this is the only way to do it. And if we can't do it this way, then I don't see a way of us working together. And it presented itself in front of the parent. I saw actually the parent's face of, now what? If I can't get the school and the home environment to work together, what do I have? My child won't have this consistent way of learning. And we had to backpedal a little bit and come up with maybe a new plan. And it took a lot of, I would say, political way of speaking in order to finally get the BCBA to tweak her program that she wanted implemented in order to make sure that we are all on the same page, and then for us to go according to that method, which eventually we had to change anyway because it was so not conducive to a school environment and was just only leading to many, many more problem behaviors. So we have to be able to see the other person's point of view, and that's what I mean by in the box and out of the box. So let's give that over to our BCBA trainees. Let them see that it's okay to not be so cookie cutterish, if that's a word, and let's make some great BCBAs. I think also a part of really training a great BCBA is to understand when they should understand when they're getting to a point of burnout. Because I think what happens is a lot of times you have those great BCBAs and they start getting all the difficult cases, or they get a lot of cases in agencies. I know a BCBA personally who is a phenomenal BCBA. She is empathetic, relatable. Her programs, her procedures, her treatment plans are all top notch. They really relate to everybody involved. People want to work with her. People want to actually give back what she, they want to show that they're really doing what she has suggested, and they ask for her. And she has come into situations where she needed to drop cases because she was getting close to burnout. But what made her a great BCBA is that she was able to recognize when that was happening and say, okay, this is my point. This is where I have to stop. So we need to make sure as supervisors in any kind of situation that we're in is that we're not burning out our RBTs, our BCBA trainees, our paraprofessionals that we're working with. Sometimes you could have a really, really great person. We want to give them every single difficult case possible. But if we get to a point that we're burning them out, we lose them. And then we don't have that great BCBA at all. So what's important is that we get to that point and we know when to stop. I work with, paraprofessionals here at my school, and there is a specific paraprofessional that I have in mind, and she is wonderful and amazing, and nothing is ever a problem. And she gets to, she has no problem working with the most challenging students. But what I've learned with her is, and in the school, is we work with one student for 1 year, one school year. After that, we give a change, we give a break. In the interim, we make sure the transition is a good one. We peer the new staff member with the old staff member. However, this specific staff member, I make sure very clearly that I'm not giving her the most difficult case every year, but rather every other year. And I change up what kind of student that is. This way, she doesn't get to that point where she's really going to get to that point of burnout, but she rather will really be able to keep on. And so far, we are on a good path and we have her, and she is great. And she's doing really wonderful things. So I think that's a very big piece on how to really make sure that we're molding really great BCBAs. Okay, so one of the key points in really getting to that great BCBA is leadership. Leadership is really key. And one of the first things we have to do when we are working and when we're supervising BCBA trainees is empowering our BCBAs to become real leaders. It's not enough for them to, have good techniques and be able to write up great behavior plans, but they need to be able to really become great leaders, and a great leader it's not a simple thing. It's someone that really focuses on a team, provides stimulating work, is inspiring to others, supports, expects only the best from others, has a very, very clear vision, leads by a very good example, has very clear goals, and has integrity really instilled in whatever they're doing. But a BCBA is key, right? They're really the key to a solid partnership between the caregiver or the parent, the school, all related services. And the BCBA has to be able to lead by example. They have to make sure that, as I said before, that they are able to really lead and empower others around them. Not only, we're empowering them to be good leaders, but they need to empower everyone else to, get ready for that challenge, to work with the student, and to, sometimes there can be a case where it is extremely involved and it's not very simple. And there's behavioral issues, and there's medical issues, and there's, a lot of, there's home issues. And we have to, a lot of times we are that key point there, and we have to really connect all the dots. And if we can't do that from a leadership position, we won't be able to really give that student, that client, whatever the case may be, the full service that they so desperately deserve and need. So as BCBAs, we need to be able to teach and inspire the RBTs in front of us, the paraprofessionals in front of us. There's a classroom in my school building that has a classroom full of very, very difficult students. There's a few classrooms like that, but one specific that's coming to my mind where there are paraprofessionals in there that work very, very hard. I was walking around with the principal. We were doing, just walking around, observing, doing some walkthroughs. And part of what, there's about 6 students in that classroom with 6 paraprofessionals. They all have one-on-ones, and they were sitting there during, they were doing, I think, a sensory activity, and each one-on-one was sitting with their students. But there were 2 students that were absent that day. And those 2 paraprofessionals were not out in the hallway. They weren't somewhere else schmoozing or having conversations or on a lunch break. They were sitting with the other classmates, the other students, and just involved as well, helping out. And I remember speaking to the principal afterwards, and his mind was like completely he goes, wow, they have the toughest students, and you would think that they would take a break. But these paraprofessionals have been so inspired by the BCBAs that work with them that they just want the very best for those students. They just want to see them, and it doesn't make a difference if it's not their one-on-one, but they have a common goal. And to me, that's the epitome of inspiring paraprofessionals and RBTs. You're getting them, you're personable and relatable enough that you can get them to work even when it's not their one-on-one and their student that's there at that time. So that's something that's really phenomenal to see. As a leader, you're also supporting parents. As a leader, you have to be that positive team player. You're working together with everyone. Think about that BCBA that I spoke about before, that home BCBA that really could not see anyone else's vision, could not be a part of a team. It was really only her way or no way. And mostly importantly, as a leader, you have to have a very clear vision and the courage to execute goals for your clients. Sometimes it's not the piece that you would actually, it wouldn't be the program that everyone would choose, and maybe it might be a little bit more difficult. But if you have, a very clear vision, and you can tell me, wait, honey, hold on one second. That BCBA may have had a very clear vision and a goal, and she was going to stand her ground. But you need to be able to stand your ground and have a very clear goal, but also make sure you're a positive team player in the process. Because if you see that they're not going to pick up on it anyway, you have to be able to say, okay, how can I get to my goal, but in a different way? Maybe I have to take a little shortcut. Maybe I have to go around a little bit. Maybe I have to add something, take something away. And it could also be something different. When I first started opening up all these supplemental programs in my building, the reason why I did it was because I was so torn, and it tore me up to see some of our lower functioning students not always able to get the programs they needed just because we didn't have what to offer. The teachers were trying their best, and the paraprofessionals were really doing their utmost, but I knew that we needed to go above and beyond. And that's where that vision was able to take me to really be able to take the school to that next level. So obviously, we have to be able to have that vision and be able to really get those goals across for our clients and our students, but making sure we're a team player in the process. So what are the first steps? Let's think for a second. What are the first steps we're going to take when we're actually working together with our trainees? What are we going to start with? So it's day number 1. I have a supervisee. I have a trainee that called me up and said, I would like to train under you. Do you have the time for me? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make a connection. Pairing is number 1. That is key. That was actually in the survey that I gave to some BCBAs that we spoke about in the beginning. That was one thing that one of the BCBAs mentioned, was that she wished her BCBA took that time to peer more with her. She felt that sometimes things were a little bit more abrupt, or that relationship wasn't that established. So I would say peering is number 1. You need to make a connection with your trainee. You're going to have a relationship with them, however long they're going to stay with you. I have teachers that they're teachers in the building. I have to have a relationship with them, not only as a supervisor, supervisee, but as they are a teacher as well. And they're going to remain for the rest of the year, no matter, even if their field work is finished, is done, but you want to have very clear expectations as well. So making that connection, you peer yourself right away. Understanding each other's backgrounds will help you make that connection. Knowing, okay, your background, your fieldwork experience comes from A, B, and C. This is where your supervisee is coming from. This is the education that they have received till now. This is the experience they've had till now. This is where they see themselves going. This is why they've become a BCBA. We have to make those connections. We have to understand each other's backgrounds so that we have that relationship. Take the time to get to know your supervisee. You can say, I have no time. It's not possible. How in the world will I ever be able to make the time and really get to know my trainee as much as I can? But it's worth it, and it's important. And that will set the tone for your relationship with them. You need to take that time to get to know them, even if it's for a few minutes. Each time you meet with them, you talk a little bit, maybe about how their day was and how it's going, and, something a little bit personal, so that you keep that relationship going. I think that if we are able to do that, and we understand each other's backgrounds, and we're able to figure out how we can really learn from each other and understand that we are actually this is the start of a relationship where, I'm going to try to train you to become the best BCBA possible. And on the other side, they are going to try to learn from you to become the best BCBA possible. And it's not about just signing off. It's not about signing those papers every single month, and at the end, and you've done it, you're good to go. That's it. And I don't have an issue at this point. When I first started becoming a supervisor in my school, I remember there was a BCBA that really just had she just needed, I think, a few more hours left to her for a supervisor. And she really had the experience. She was a colleague of mine. I learned a lot from her. She learned a lot from me. We've had that relationship. And at that point, there wasn't something that it was just that I had gotten my BCBA license before her. I would say that probably was the only time in my experience that I've ever just signed off, because we were colleagues. We were actually learning from each other. We were sitting weekly, I would say even bi-weekly, where we were talking about different methods and talking about different, programs that we've implemented in our classrooms and giving advice to each other. So technically we were having that, those discussions, and we were, technically I could say I was supervising her, but it was more of a peer relationship. But it's not about signing off. We cannot just, put our name off on everything. That is very important. But throughout all of this, we have to always keep in mind the ethical part of it while making a connection, because I think a lot of times the lines could get a little bit blurred. Family members can come to you. Can you be the BCBA and my child? I know you're the best, but again, you're a family member and that doesn't work. So many times, I'm sure many of you have had it where you're sitting at a gathering and someone turns to you and says, "Oh, look at my my little son over there. What do you think? You think he's maybe a little bit on the spectrum? Do you see some of that? I've had some teachers tell me that, that he really sits alone on the side and plays by himself." My advice to you is to say nothing. Zip it up. Say, "Oh, I hear that you have concerns." My recommendation is speak to the teacher and maybe speak to your pediatrician, maybe speak to your doctor and go from there. Don't confirm, don't deny, don't anything. Just push them to speak to the right people. I've had many times. I remember actually my nephew. He was about, I would say, 2 years old, and he was someone that liked to play by himself. First of all, he had the play skills, and he was quiet, barely spoke, and all day I heard from my sister-in-law, "You think he's autistic? Do you think he's a child with autism?" And that's all I heard. That's all I heard from her. And I just kept my mouth zipped. I said, "If you have any concerns, speak to the teacher, speak to your doctor." And everyone kept on telling her that everything is just fine. He's just a quiet, shy boy. And that's exactly what he was. And my nephew is now 18 years old and one of like the real loudmouths in her family. So these things happen. And I think parents just get worried, especially, in the world that we live in today, where everything is, very public and out there, and it's, everyone just gets nervous by the smallest little thing. But we have to make sure that we separate the family and the ethical part of things. But specifically for a supervisor-supervisee relationship, as it says in the BCBA handbook, supervisor may not be related to, subordinate to, or employed by the trainee during the experience period. So you cannot pay them. That can't happen. So as an assistant principal, I do not supervise anymore. But as a BCBA, I did when I worked in the school, because they weren't employed by me. But that's important to note, that it can't be that kind of relationship, and it's important to keep that in mind. I think we can get into a lot of sticky situations. I remember a very specific sticky situation that I got into, where a parent in my school called me up. They were opening up an agency, and they called me up in the beginning, and I had said, "I'm so sorry, I don't have the time to actually, to be your BCBA on staff at that time." And I apologized, and they said, "No problem." She called me back about a month later, and she said, "I have a BCBA that is working with me and I love. She actually is not yet a BCBA. Would you mind just signing off for her?" And I was in a little bit of a sticky situation, and I said, "I'm so sorry. I can't sign off on something that I'm not actually overseeing. It's not right, it's not ethical, and I don't feel comfortable with it because I don't know, the fidelity in it. I don't know what these programs are. I can't actually, have my name on that." And she begged, and she said, "Come on, it's not such a big deal. I would never I'll make sure it never gets back to you." And I kept on apologizing, and I kept saying, "I'm so sorry. It's not something, obviously you can call me for advice on a separate thing. If you just need a little bit of advice on something, I have no problem, but I can't actually sign off on something that I am not actually supervising." And she ended the phone call in a very negative note, with some, maybe one or two nasty comments. But I held my ground, and the truth is that agency did fall apart about it. Not that I wanted it to, and not that I felt that it would, but we do have to have an ethical groundwork that we stand on. And if we don't have that, then eventually, people will see through that. So it's important to keep that in mind. But we have to make sure that we are on target, and we remain ethical throughout the entire experience. And not only that, we set that example for the trainee. Okay, so where do we go from here? So you've made that connection with your trainee. And the first thing you want to do is to print out a contract. You want to set up a contract with them where it really, it demonstrates exactly what this relationship is going to look like. So there's a few things that you will need to have. I attached the printout of a contract that I have used. It is something that I took from the BCBA handbook. I modified it according to what I needed, but I left in, the important pieces of it, which are the nature of the contract, the standards of the contract, appropriate activities that should be used, the nature of the supervision, how it will be documented, and obviously it needs to be signed. So I want to go through the contract a little bit with you. On the next few slides, there are, I copied, little snips of the contract, and let's just talk about it a little bit just to get an idea of what exactly the contract should look like. So firstly, you want to make sure that you have the dates on it, exactly what kind of experience it's going to look like, the category of it, how much is required, how much supervised experience is required, and where it's going to take place, the site that it's going to take place, whether it's going to be in a home environment, school environment. Sometimes agencies have, groups or things like that over there, so it might be in a clinic. You need to, specify exactly where that is going to take place. Then something that's important that I would like to point out is appropriate activities that you will do. You want to make sure to incorporate many different, analytical skills that are related to the task list. And that's something that we'll talk about in a minute, but not besides for that is making sure that it aligns to the 7 dimensions of behavior. So the 7 dimensions of ABA, which, Bear, Wolf, and Risley pointed out. So besides for those two, you really want to make sure that you have very appropriate activities. And they may include assessments, designing and implementing behavior programs, overseeing the implementation of those programs, not just decreasing behavioral issues, but also increasing different skill sets, and anything that really is aligned to any behavior analytic skills. So anything that we will attribute to behavior analysis, which could be attending meetings, which could be researching literature related to the program, talking to, paraprofessionals, training, giving over a program to a paraprofessional, an evaluation that you might do. So it's really the supervisor, the supervisor needs to make sure that they are appropriate, but keep in mind that anything that really isn't appropriate shouldn't be, something that you're keeping your supervisee busy with. So it is important. I like to specify on the contract so that if the trainee wants to participate in some activities that are really, really not appropriate, they should know from the get-go that attending meetings, they could be meetings in school, there's a lot of times there's team meetings, and they're not discussing anything to do with behavior analysis, but they might be talking about, the students, math program, and there's no behavior analytic content. You're really not giving your supervisee, that meeting is it's great experience for the trainee, and they should probably attend, but not necessarily maybe count all of it as hours. Providing interventions that are not behavior analysis, any administrative work that is not related at all to, behavior analysis, keep in mind this is not appropriate activities. So that should be in there. Not only that, you should include the nature of the supervision, what it's going to look like. Maybe it'll be in groups, maybe it'll be one-on-one, and we'll discuss all this, but you want to make sure that there is that interactions between the trainee and the client or the student, or there's feedback occurring. You want to make sure there's a lot of that as a part of the nature of that supervision. And then you want to have a list of what they actually, what you as the supervisor and what the supervisee are agreeing to do. So you're going to make sure that you're up to date with the standards. You are going to make sure that you're abiding by the ethical code, the ethical compliance code for behavior analysis. You're making sure that you're going to work together. You're going to have in-depth discussions on issues affecting practice. You are going to make sure that the contract is being carried through, that the forms, are going to be filled out. You're actually going to agree to show up at appointments and be there for the supervisee. That's a very, very, very big piece that you want to make sure that is actually happening. When I did the survey, I found that it was very mixed reviews, where some BCBAs did say that their supervisors didn't always keep to appointments. And it's very unsettling. And it doesn't allow for a good connection, a good relationship, where they don't feel that you're really there for them. Now, sometimes, obviously, there's always things that occur and there's always things that happen. And I could be the first person to tell you that it's sometimes really, really difficult to keep to appointments. However, when, you want to make sure that you're giving them the hours that they deserve and that they need. And keeping those appointments will really help that happen. So you also want to make sure to know when you can terminate the contract, if they're not completing their hours satisfactorily, that they're violating the ethical code, they're not filling out their reports, they're missing meetings constantly. There has to be a point where you say, hey, you're really violating the terms of the contract, and this can be grounds for termination. So it's important to have that open relationship with your supervisee, that you can then actually say that to them. So now that you have your contract, you have a completed signed contract, you are ready to meet with them, let's talk about goals. You want to make sure that however you're going to be really training and really working together with your supervisee, that it's goal oriented. I had asked in that survey if they felt that their supervisors were goal oriented. It was also mixed reviews, but one did say that not necessarily did they have a plan in place, but each time they met, there was something very specific that they spoke about. And it was very related to what, this specific BCBA was working on at that time. So it was goal oriented, but not necessarily planned, which is okay, whatever works. But it is important to keep in mind, to keep yourself and your supervisee on track, is to be goal oriented. So you really want to make sure, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing, we look at the 7 dimensions of behavior, that it is applied, it is socially significant. So if it's goal oriented, you are targeting the right parts of what you want to teach. So that is important. You want to choose very relevant goals to what the site calls for, where you're actually supervising. I would recommend mapping out what you're going to be working on, gaining the input from your supervisee, what they hope to learn and what you hope to teach, and together really coming up with a very clear set of goals that you're going to accomplish over your time together. Perhaps they may be weekly goals, perhaps monthly. At the end, you're going to work on maybe specific to the setting, what it could look like, especially if you have a supervisor that comes to you who's perhaps taking a supervisor when they are working in an agency and taking a different supervisor when they're working in a school, and this way gaining all that experience from the different settings. So you want to make sure that you're giving them specific goals to that settings, so that they are actually really getting what they need from every single setting and every type of supervisor. So that's important to keep in mind when you're really mapping out those goals. When doing these goals, as I mentioned before, you really need to make sure that everything's aligned to the BACB task list. That's very, very important. I attached I copied the link to that. Obviously, they're updated regularly, but it really is a great resource for instructors, and it's a study tool for those that are taking their exam. But we do need to make sure that everything we supervise is really aligned to the task list. Everything that we're supervising, all the goals that we're working on really does align itself. And the truth is, when starting out, I highly recommend printing out the task list, reviewing it, highlighting, talking about it, referring back to it, using it as a constant resource, so that is something that you are touching upon throughout your time together, because this is the tool that needs to be used constantly. As of right now, there's the 4th edition. The 5th edition will be coming out in January 2022, but we need to make sure to keep that aligned so that you're using that throughout your experience together. This is tool number one. But tool number two, which is very important, before getting to tool number two, let's talk about the task list for a moment. The BACB 4th edition task list is organized into 3 sections. The first being basic behavior and analytic skills, which covers all the tasks that a BCBA will perform, not necessarily on all clients, but many, but they're the commonly used skills and procedures. The next section that it is divided into is client-centered responsibilities, which is it's tasks that's related to all clients, and they apply in most applied situations. And the last section that it is divided into is foundational knowledge, which is basically anything that, it's concepts that you have mastered already before actually starting to work as a behavior analyst. Not necessarily things that you will perform as a BCBA, but there are concepts that need to be understood in order to actually perform the task that you would in the first 2 sections. So it's like the basic methods, the principles of behavior, or anything that you're actually going to be, that's the knowledge that you need in order to be a practicing BCBA. And then obviously ethics and professional conduct are incorporated into each section. So this is really your groundwork, it's your foundation, it's that tool that you need that really guides you throughout everything. So this task list should be reviewed at the beginning and then incorporated throughout, discussed, highlighted, and really reviewed. And then importantly is to then review the 7 dimensions of ABA, because this really is, it's our foundation. It's that base work that we really constantly look back on throughout when creating programs, saying, does it follow these 7 dimensions? Because if it not, then it's not behavior analysis. So it's important to constantly key in and say, okay, is it not? Does it have that piece of it? Does it cover all 7? And reviewing all of them, that it's applied, it has social significance, that it's behavioral, that we're actually looking at the target, what has to be changed, what is, the dependent variable that has to be changed. Is it analytical? Is there a functional relationship involved? Is it technological? Can it be replicated? The procedures have to be really written down and described so that it can be replicated. Is it conceptually systematic? Are they linked to scientific principles? We have to remember that ABA is a science. Is it effective? Did it actually work, right? We keep on talking about an effective supervisor. What we're trying to say is we want all of us to be supervisors that are effective, that actually work. We are really, making sure that the next generation, that the next, flow of BCBAs are BCBAs that, can actually follow through on all of this. And last but not least, generality, which is that whatever change you're going to make will last over time, shows in other environments with other people. These are very, very important concepts that we need to make sure that we're constantly drilling and constantly referring back to. So when teaching about, a program, a procedure, we're making sure, wait, if somebody else reads it, can they replicate it? Wait, what's the point of targeting this specific behavior? We always have that question, what's going to happen? What will happen if we change it? Is it something that is important? Will it have immediate importance to this client, to this student, to this person? So if we're constantly referring back to it and we make those connections constantly to the 7 dimensions, it becomes a part of them. It becomes just something that they're constantly used to and they're constantly thinking about whenever they're doing any behavior analytic work. And that's what we want. We want them that it should be, it should be something that just comes naturally to them. So these 2 pieces are very, very important as we are working. The next thing we want to do is, before we actually get to training and working, is to review the requirements, what they actually have to do throughout the process, as they're being supervised. The BCBA handbook is a great place to look at. And, the piece that I attached here was updated in November 2020, where it says exactly how many hours, how many of those hours need to be supervised. And that's something that's important to review with your supervisees so they make sure that they're really, they're the ones that are on top of it. They're the ones that are really going about that and keeping track of it and really making sure that they're doing what they need to do. So with all that, I believe that we need to take a moment to really think about you as the supervisor. What is your role here? Because we've talked about the requirements that we have to review and all of that. But when it comes down to it, what is your role as the supervisor and what is the role of the supervisee? So looking at the supervisor, you have a very important job here. First of all, it's important to stay up to date in current research and behavior analysis in order to make sure that you're giving the supervisee exactly what they need. There is a great set of research papers that is, that I constantly refer back to here, that I am, touching upon. A lot of these authors, they came up with an entire packet of great practices when supervising. And I highly recommend that at the end, when you look through my references, to go back to them and read through some of these articles. And there are many more that I didn't even touch upon, but they are great. They're great. It's a great additional research tool to look at when researching the best practices. So as a supervisor, a BCBA are expected to become supervisors in many, many different capacities, right? You're in different settings, different places with different people. And immediately you need to make sure that you're setting very, very clear expectations. And I think that's what the role of the supervisor is starting off, all the most up-to-date research. But besides for that, you're making sure you're setting very clear expectations, you're setting very clear goals, you're setting very clear deadlines for things that, you're working on together with your supervisee. If you have clear expectations with goals and deadlines, the next most important for you as a supervisor is making sure that you have time for them and you have time on task. Because this is the piece that I see that will take a supervisee, take that trainee, or even that RBT who desperately needs your help and your supervision and your guidance. And if you don't have the time for them, they're either going to do something wrong, they're not going to do the correct procedure, they're going to eventually learn not to come to you. You're going to have that history there established before them. And therefore, I've had a time where I started working with a supervisee, and it got to a point where I saw that I would not have enough time for them. And I had a very open conversation, and I said, I'm sorry, I cannot supervise you with fidelity because I don't have that time to give you. And I don't feel that it's fair to both you and myself. And I stopped. And I did help them find another supervisor because I didn't want to leave them hanging. But you have to know your limits, and you have to know what you can give and what you can't give. There was a supervisor that I knew, another BCBA, and she had a huge heart and wanted to help everyone, and was taking on trainees left and right. And at the end of the day, she wasn't helping any of them because she wasn't giving the time to any of them. And I remember she came to me at one point and said, I am drowning. And we ended up dividing up a lot of her supervisees with other BCBAs just to help out a little bit. But you want to make sure that you're giving them that time. Because like I said in the beginning, I felt that from my supervisor. I felt that she gave me all that time that I needed. And that was something that stays with me till today. So that's something that you really do need to keep in mind. Do I have the time for them? Your role also is to see, you have to establish from the beginning, what do I want them to leave with? What kind of impression will I make with them? If you have that goal in mind, especially when you thought about, way back in the beginning of this workshop, when I asked you all to think, what is something that you yourself think about with your supervision experience? Now you think about, what do I want my supervisees to leave with? Will it be that same thing? Or will it be something totally opposite? Will it be something that I desperately needed? You want to make sure you're making that good impression, that they're referring back to you, that they're feeling that connection with you. Effective supervision is critical to the overall development of our field. If we don't have that effective supervision, what do we have? We have BCBAs that are not necessarily BCBAs that can be effective when they are BCBAs. And we must keep that in mind. So at the end, we have to think about, I want my supervisee, I want that trainee or that RBT when they leave, that they're going to, when they think of me, they're going to think of whatever that is. So let's keep that in mind. So that's our role, right? That's our role as a supervisor. But we want them to remember that when they think of me, so many times I work with BCBAs and they'll mention their mentor and they'll say, she always said, and they'll mention a specific type of, methodology. I'll discuss this a little bit later on, but talking about even, she always said that you need to have positive reinforcement in order, when writing a behavior plan, so that before you even get to the consequence, you need to know that they're full of that in the classroom, and then you can actually be called a mentor and a role model. That's something that will be established. And then we get to the role of the supervisee. What is the supervisee's role? What is that trainee's role when working together with you? And they have a very simple role. And their role is twofold. One, they have to make sure that they're gaining the experience that they need. And if they're not, they need to seek that. They can have that open discussion with you if you allow for that. But they need to take that initiative and make sure that they gain the experience that they need. Their other responsibility is to really make sure that they take care of all their paperwork and document their hours. That's not your responsibility. It's not something that you do for them. You can guide them and show them best practices. But at the end of the day, they need to come to you to get their paperwork signed. They need to make sure that they are documenting all their hours and making sure that they're really, reviewing all their paperwork possible. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that they are not an assistant. They're not a secretary. They are someone that is there to learn. And yes, sometimes they will take on a little bit of that role in order to learn, but you need to train them in the process. They're not there to just do all your work for you, your administrative work, so that you're okay, but they can do administrative work if that's something that you're teaching them, that you're training them. So make sure to keep that, keep that differentiation there so that things don't, you don't overstep boundaries and the roles are very clearly defined. So talking about paperwork responsibilities, there are very specific things that a BCBA trainee needs to make sure that they are doing. There is the daily weekly experience tracker, and I did attach a link to a video that you can share with those that you are supervising, how to use the BACB experience tracker that they have on the BACB website. And it's very simple and it's very easy. I think it's an Excel worksheet and you can really track that. It's good if you are being audited. But then there are very specific monthly verification forms that need to be signed by you, the supervisor, and the final verification forms. And there's some other forms that need to be filled out at the end, which the trainee needs to come to you. I know that all my supervisees come to me. They come already with the stamped envelope, but it's something that you need to fill out and you need to, it has to come from you. But they come with everything prepared so that it doesn't become something that you're running out and printing and everything. They have that responsibility, but then you fill that out at the end. And all these forms can be printed out from the BACB website. So this is something that the responsibility is on the supervisee, and it's for you to just guide them in the beginning and show them where things could be and be found and give them some helpful tools of what they can use in order to make the tracking of it all that much easier. Okay, so this is their paperwork responsibilities. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of settings that you may find yourself supervising in. There is agencies that many of us work for. There's a school environment, and a lot of times you will work for an agency, but you will work in an agency, a clinic environment, and then there is also the home environment that you will work for. So when I say agency, I mean that the agency environment, that clinic environment, a school environment, and a home environment. But what I would like to point out here is that in any of these environments, what we would like to make sure that we give over to our supervisee is that the idea is to make an impression. The idea is that to show that you're a team player, you're here to help, you're here to learn, you're here to work together with everyone, and that you can do in any setting. Parent connection happens in any setting. In the school environment, you're going to end up working together with a parent. If you're in a clinical setting, you're going to end up working with the parent because the parent is involved at some stage, whenever, obviously, right? They are a very important part of the team. And we want to make sure that this is always established. You're making an impression in the environment you're in with the people that are working there, no matter if it's, the paraprofessionals, the other therapists that are involved that are working there, or it's teachers, or it's administrators, or it's secretaries. We want to make an impression. You want to help them understand what it means to become a team player in these environments, as well as really making that parent connection. In any of these environments, you will have different types of clients. I think as BCBAs, we all end up with a pet peeve at some point. And I developed mine early on, which was when I was working with different, even RBTs, paraprofessionals, BCBA trainees. A lot of what I heard, which frustrated me again and again, which was, I don't work with that type of client, with that type of student. I will work with that type. I won't work with that type. And besides for the fact that it throws you off a little bit and it sort of develops, I guess, you look at the person a little bit in a light of, oh, you're particular, you don't, either you're not willing to learn or you're not a team player in the situation. Whatever the case may be, it leaves a little bit of a negative impression. And I'm not saying that different people have different, you thrive with different environments, and a lot of people have a knack working with specific type of students. I know that I worked with teachers. Some teachers did very, very well with the students that were extremely gifted. And there were some teachers that work very well with students that are very behavioral, and some teachers that work very well with the very, very low functioning, physically disabled students. They had that creativity to really bring a smile on their faces. And I'm not saying we don't try to put these teachers in those classrooms to let them shine where they really, thrive. Let them thrive where they shine, rather. And the same thing here. But when you're in that learning stage, it's important to learn about all the different types of students that you may encounter. When you're placed in a school and you're a BCBA and you need to guide other people, or you're training RBTs and you need to guide them with every type of student, you don't get to pick or choose which type of student. You need to have experience with all of them. So definitely you can have your niche that you really do very well in, but try to stay away from verbalizing it so far in the beginning. Train your supervisees to not do that, and to give them that experience with all the types of students, with all the different types of clients, so that they really have that understanding of all of them, and that they can feel that they can work with, when working in an agency, they might work one-on-one at home, and there might be different types of students. They might have different types of goals, but you might be working with a home setting goal of ADL skills. There might be family parent goals. There will be play programs, occupying skills that you might want to do. But in agencies, there might be social skill groups that you will work with, and these might be with high functioning students. In the district that I work for, a lot of the agencies, what they have is a lot of the students go to the mainstream schools, and then they might go after school to an agency where they'll have a social skills group. And this is where BCBAs will oversee them and supervise and train the paraprofessionals or the teachers to work with these students in an analytical way, and making sure that they are really learning those social skills that they can generalize to the mainstream environment. So there's so much to learn in, with all the different types of students, and we want to try to give them that full experience. In schools, you might work on a lot of the goals that you may see in, that you might work with by an agency, but it's very specific. We always start off with communication. There'll always be functional living skills, but there's also going to be classroom skills. We want them to learn how to sit in a classroom, how to maintain their attention, how to wait their turn, how to socialize with their peers, and also how to learn academics. A lot of times students, they're very smart, but they can't learn math in the way that their peers can in a special ed setting, in a self-contained classroom, just because of their disabilities, of what they need. They might need it, they might need to be taught through behavior analysis and then be the smartest in math, but they have a different method of the way they get there. So that's important to know when they're in this type of setting. In my school specifically, we have many sensory programs that get implemented throughout in order to make sure they can stay in the classroom setting, that they can be where they are. I had mentioned that we have an ABA center in our building. The goal of the ABA center is to teach them skills in order for them to go back into their classroom. That is our goal. Our goal is not for them to stay out in the center. Our goal is for them to be in the classroom and become a part of the classroom setting. So that is very, very important to constantly keep in mind throughout. Okay, where do we start? We made that connection. We filled out the contract. We have solid goals ready. We really have a solid plan ready for our supervisee. We feel comfortable and confident. They understand the setting they're in. They understand the type of clients they're about to work with and be trained with. Now, where do we start? So we followed all those first steps. Let's get ready to actually supervise. So first and foremost, I believe that supervisees, anybody really technically, any of the RBTs, any trainee does need to understand that there's a piece called administrative work. And we need to give them that opportunity to learn how to do it. It's something that, they need to gain throughout their experience so that they can understand how to do it and not flounder when the time comes that they have to do it. And obviously every setting and every, an agency will have different type of administrative work than a school environment. And the agency will have treatment plans. A school environment will only have behavior intervention plans that they're writing up, or ABA programs that they're writing up, and they won't have treatment plans to write up for insurance agencies. So there's so many different pieces, and obviously whichever setting they're in, they need to gain that knowledge of all the administrative work. I sometimes find that trainees get very thrown off. I don't want to be busy with that. Just throw me into the classroom. I want to get right in. Throw me into that setting. I want to work with that client right away. I don't want busy work, but it's all a part of what we do as a BCBA, and we need to give them that opportunity to learn, and they should do it with fidelity, and they should do it right. And they should be plans that they can actually, that people can read. They should be technological, from the 7 dimensions. People can actually read and people can actually follow through, and they should be able to talk about. So we want to teach them how to write up behavior plans. We want to teach them how to write up reports. We want to teach them how to write goals, how to navigate. Obviously there's many different data collection apps, and they need to learn how to use them. All agencies, our schools are using them at this point, and there's going to be many different types of them. And obviously sometimes they'll be, they'll come into a different work environment. There'll be a different app or application that they're going to be using. That makes sense. But we need to give them an idea of how to navigate them and how to work through them. And if you're supervising them in an insurance, in an agency where they have to fill out insurance paperwork, that's something that you need to guide them and teach them and show them how to do it. So that's very important. And then the next part is giving them all that training and throwing them into the different activities that they will need as a board certified behavior analyst. So some of the acceptable activities that we've touched upon, but that you should definitely work on, and this is just a list, but obviously there's so many more things that we can touch upon, but we want to make sure that trainees have multiple experiences with multiple supervisors in many of these areas of activities. So this is from the BCBA handbook, and we want to know that they know how to carry out assessments. Obviously, there's many different types of assessments. I know that I was trained very strongly as when I was getting my field work done in the BB map. And I knew that that was I did very well in that. Essentials for living, not so much. And obviously there's others, but whatever you're using, that's what you'll give them training for. And you might tell them, do some research into the other assessments. But there are other types of assessments. There's preference assessments. There's functional assessments. There's assessments that they might do on staff members. So there's many different types of assessments that we want to give them training in. We want to give them training on how to design and implement and monitor skill acquisition programs. And the same thing with behavior plans. We want them to learn how to oversee a lot of these programs by others. We want them to learn how to train others. So we might want to see how they can sit together with a paraprofessional, with an assistant, with an ABA therapist, and show them how to actually carry out those programs. We want to see if they can communicate and collaborate effectively with caregivers and other professionals and any other activity, anything else that could possibly. And I touched upon this when I spoke about in the contract, but this is something that we definitely want to work on. I think the two biggest pieces that we're going to constantly go back to is really behavior intervention plans and actually designing, ABA programs, teaching new skills. But I think with behavior intervention plans, we want to make sure that we touch upon the very, very strong points of how do we conduct and write up a functional behavioral assessment? Because in any setting, in any environment, that's something that's going to have to happen. How do you create a behavioral intervention plan? And most importantly, what do you do in a crisis? Obviously we have a lot of what happens, a lot of problem behaviors happen. There could be not safe behaviors, aggression, things that come up where you're in a place where, what do I do now? What happens if there is a crisis where the student or the client is not safe to themselves or others? What do we do? And there's many different protocols. Agencies have protocols, schools have protocols. For example, by us, we do have a crisis intervention procedure that we do when there is, a time where a student is not safe to themselves or others, and each student is very specific to their own, but we have a team that is trained in it, and this is written up in their behavior plan. So we have to make sure that this is all incorporated, and we teach them what to do and how to go about it and what that protocol looks like. And in that same vein, we're teaching them to always make sure to look out for the protocols that are in that agency and in that school. How to implement prevention procedures, teaching replacement behaviors, which will line up to teaching new skills, and obviously data collection. I think data collection is a piece on its own, obviously, where we teach and we train our trainees. And everything that I'm saying really also, applies to RBTs as well when we're working together with them. And we're teaching them how to implement a behavior intervention plan, and we're teaching them how to carry out all the different pieces of it. But data collection is its own wonderful piece where we want to teach them the different types of methods we can use and when to use them and how they will look like, and give them opportunities to practice doing the different types of data collection procedures in the different, experiences. It's important because I remember in my school, probe collection was really the only way we went about it. And that was because a lot of the paraprofessionals couldn't see themselves doing other things. And that is what I learned. And it took me a while to learn other methods because I was so used to only doing, probing everything, yes or no, yes or no. It really tunneled my vision with data collection. And part of it I had to teach myself, and part of it I went elsewhere to learn from others, to really gain a larger repertoire of how to collect data, because obviously every situation does not call for probe data collection. There are so many other methods and they should all be used. And we have to make sure that we're really getting to all of them. So that's a very, very big piece that we want to make sure that we're pinpointing. And then on the other side of things is teaching new skills. We want to make sure that we're really, depending on the setting, what new skill, what are we actually teaching? And as I had mentioned before, the goals are always going to be, we're always going to start off with communication. We're going to incorporate ADL skills. There are going to be play skills and there are going to be social skills, because all these skills are socially significant. They're applied. They have immediate importance. We want to make sure that they are able to really gain, the foundational structure of what we teach new skills, where we're going to head right away. A client sits in front of you, we want to see right away, how do they communicate? Can they communicate? If they can, how are they communicating? Is it verbal? Is it nonverbal? Are they using a different method? They can't. okay, this is step number one. This is what we're going to teach them. Obviously, that's how it's going to go. Where are they up to? Okay, do they need ADL skills to be taught? Okay, do they have that social skills? These are, the foundational structure of what we're always going to look at, no matter the setting. And I think that's important that we right away start teaching them, our trainees right away that, okay, you're sitting down with a client. You're sitting down with a student. What am I going to look at first? And if we target them right away, okay, these are, the 4 main areas that we're going to look at, and everything else will fall into place as well, then we'll really be able to, a lot of these skills that we're teaching them will also cancel out the behavioral issues. A lot of times behavioral issues happen because they can't socialize or they can't communicate. So they go hand in hand. But these 2 methods, the behavior intervention plans and teaching new skills, are going to be the first places where we're going to start right away in any setting with any trainee with an RBT. That's really where we're going to focus solely on. My next recommendation, I believe, would be choosing a weekly topic. It could be a bi-weekly topic depending on how often you meet, and sometimes it could be a complete and total and a full topic that will lead into even more topics. But depending on all of that, you want to incorporate ethics and professional development throughout all of that. You want to encourage your trainees to seek out more professional development and to look, to look into different research papers and to get comfortable with the different journals that there are out there, with the up and coming research that there is, incorporating ethics. But you want to try to focus it on a weekly goal. So I list some examples of what you would possibly focus on, which I had talked about with appropriate activities, but assessments, FBAs, BIPs, prevention strategies, accordingly, how to write goals. You can spend a lot of time just talking to them how to actually write these goals and what would they look like. Obviously, the different applications that you use have different formats, but you want to have them keep to a specific format that it incorporates everything that you might need in that goal. How to run a discrete trial session. It's basics. And we want them to know how to do it and to train others how to do it. So that's going to be just throughout everything. But that might be something that you want to make sure that they get first thing right away. Error correction procedures. That has to become literally a part of the repertoire from the beginning. Prompting procedures. That is a very, very big piece. A lot of times I get the question so much from paraprofessionals, like, how do I know which prompt to use when? There's so many prompts. How do I know? So we want to give them that opportunity to practice the different types of prompts in different types of situations so they get familiar with which prompts they can possibly use in every single situation. And sometimes there's many different ones. There's a few, but give them that direction that they have something to fall back on constantly. Shaping procedures, task analysis, those are simple and basics, and just having them write them up completely and constantly and having them carry them out and show them how to use it, and then teaching them every single step and the different chains. And there's so many to learn, but touching upon them, these are all topics that you will have in any work environment that you're really working in. And then there are parent goals. In school settings, you will not have that. When working for an agency, that is a part of the treatment plan. So there will always be parent goals, and they should learn how to do that in a empathetic and a way that is not forceful and is reasonable, and that parents don't feel that this stress upon themselves of carrying out those goals. So these are topics that can be used, that can be touched upon. I think on-the-spot behavior management strategies is a great topic sometimes, and I hope that many BCBAs that are going into this field because they have that common sense, that quick reaction of what to do in a certain situation, of what to try. I find it especially useful in a school setting where we can help teachers really learn on-the-spot behavior management strategies. I've done so many workshops with paraprofessionals to give them some ideas of what to use in different situations. Sometimes just quick thinking on your feet will actually be the same thing as carrying out, an ABC procedure. And I would say probably 99% of the time they're aligned, but making sure they're consistent. You're doing the same thing again and again so that it's reliable, but giving them that toolbox is something that is so effective and something that is really relatable to what they really, really need. I would like to actually throw in something here where I feel that, as I had mentioned earlier, and I said the role of the supervisor is we want them to leave with something. We want them to leave with a tip, a tool, a material, something. We want them to feel they gained something out of it. And when I sent out my survey and I had asked them what they had learned from their supervisor, what is something that they remember till this day that they have said, and I wrote some of them down here, but one BCBA wrote, wait 12 to 24 hours before returning a call. In the moment of crisis, we're not helpful. Once they calm down, we can evaluate what happened and come up with a plan to move forward. And this BCBA makes a very good point. And this is something that she carries through. We want to make sure that we're giving them something to like a tip, something that they're going to say, oh, my supervisor used to always tell me that it remained with me, and it's something that really guides me to this day. And a lot of times we do get that call, oh no, something happened, or my student is throwing a complete, having a meltdown. I don't know what to do. Come up here right now. We're not helpful in that situation. The best we can say is, do the plan. Whatever the plan says you should do, it's a crisis, maybe call in the crisis team. If it's a crisis, maybe move away from the student. Whatever it is, keep the demand. If they're being aggressive, move everyone away from them. Whatever the plan has written that you should really be implementing, you say. Then you come back and you have that discussion a couple hours later when everyone has returned to baseline and everyone is feeling okay again. Then you go back and you say, okay, let's talk about it. What did we do? What can we change? What can we do better next time? How can we make it that the staff feels safe, or whatever the case may be? And when I saw this tip, it actually resonated with me. I feel this is a great tool that we need to use and implement. Another BCBA said something that she always heard that stuck with her: mans must always be under motivation. And we know that's true, and that's something that if we keep with ourselves, that we always know when we're teaching, we all have something that we constantly say when we're working. So that's something, just make sure it's something that you want your trainee to carry through. Something else that I've seen, positive reinforcement must come before any kind of consequence, any kind of punishment procedure. Work with the client first yourself before expecting the parent, before expecting the assistant to do so based on your guidance. This is something that I believe in so strongly, which is if you cannot work with that client, you cannot expect your client, your paraprofessional, your assistant to do so. So you want to make sure that your trainee can actually get in there and work with them and not be afraid. I actually worked with a supervisee at one point who was desperately afraid of students that were in any shape or form aggressive. And aggressive, obviously, we know is we can never use that as a target behavior because it's not defined enough. But this specific student would kick very, very strong. And whenever this trainee came within 10 feet of that student, they would immediately start backing up, start moving away, putting space in between them. And obviously the student felt that and would automatically, do whatever they can to become aggressive to kick that specific trainee. And I remember saying that, if you're going to go talk to that assistant right now and say, this is what you need to do in the situation when that student becomes aggressive, but you're backing up and you're terrified to even come into proximity to that student, what are you teaching that paraprofessional? What are you teaching that assistant? And that supervisee had to really train themselves to be able to first we had to peer her with the student and have positive interactions and wouldn't be alone until she felt comfortable to be in close proximity to that student. The student wasn't automatically trying to kick her, but it took some time. But I hope that was a valuable lesson that she took with her. She's actually not in my school anymore, but I hope she took it with her in the future, because it would be impossible. And I hear it all the time from paraprofessionals and ABA therapists and assistants, and show me how to do it. They'll complain how difficult a student is, and they'll say, I want to see how you will work. And obviously they're testing you a little bit, but it's a true statement. And then maybe even leaving them with a tool or materials that can guide them to this day. Something that the BCBAs that work in my school, two very experienced and professional and valuable, and they have done unbelievable work in my school. They've created a card ring with very useful tips on each card that they can leave in their pocket of, we have smocks in our building, and they can leave in there and they can refer back to or even practice upon. But I thought it was so nice and so useful, and they've given it out to paraprofessionals and teachers. And when you're sometimes in the midst of something, but if it's on that card ring and it's a statement and it gives you that one helpful hint, it'll stay in your mind rather than having to go and read through an entire plan. Another helpful tip or tool that we've used in our school is sometimes you give ABA therapist or you give someone a behavior intervention plan. It's impossible to read like this, or if something happens, to know exactly what to do. So we've created in my building, which is a protocol, and it lists, what are we looking at? What support do we need to give, and what now? So what do we do, right? We're looking at what exactly does that behavior look like? Child hits. What support do we give? It lists, the reinforcement system, whatever else that may look like. And then what now? Now the child hit, what do we do? And it'll list exactly, like in very simple terms, what do we do? So it's a very quick glance at the protocol on the wall and to know exactly what to do. So these types of materials, tips, and tools will remain with you. And last but not least, just watching a BCBA. If they're watching you, these trainees are watching you, if you're remaining consistent with what you're doing and what you're following through, it'll remain with them. It'll be imprinted. They will have that for whenever they need. Let's talk about the different types of supervision that you can do, okay? In the survey, I had discussed that. I did mention that. Now, there is the simple one where it's not simple, but the typical one, I should say, which is the individual supervision. It's that one-on-one where we all are going to do, we all do, which is that one-on-one supervision. You're doing observations, you're getting that feedback just from the supervisor. You might do some live modeling or video modeling, but that's one-on-one. Another type of supervision which you can do, which is group supervision. I actually really enjoy doing that in addition to one-on-one, because I think you definitely need one-on-one, but you can have an additional supervision, which is group supervision, which is when you can bring the different supervisees that you're training and you bring them together maybe once a month, where you gather together, you have a topic that you discuss and you share ideas. What I used to do is I would have each one bring up someone that they're working, a client, a student that they're working with, either a problem that they're having, or they need some more ideas on how to maybe engage them, on how to, teach a specific skill. Something's not working, they need to change the plan. And I found it extremely beneficial. There's something to say about peer-to-peer review. There was that peer feedback. We had some of them observe each other, and they learn so much from each other, and they gain that much more, not only from the supervisor, but from each other. Now, you might say to me, what happens if there's a little bit of a not great apple in the mix? So either you don't encourage them to observe in a very, nice way, in a very natural way. You encourage, you make sure that they're not being observed, or you just don't have them observe each other. You can, usually, I'm trying to remember if it has ever happened to me. I think it happened to me one time. It wasn't such a terrible apple in the mix, but their peers definitely saw it, be able to see for themselves, and on their own just didn't observe that person. It's not something you would even have to facilitate, but it's something that is extremely useful. It's something that is beneficial to all of them. I found that it was a great addition to all the supervision work that we had done. And that brings me to a very important piece, which is how do we actually supervise? So I like to use the behavior skills training method, which is instructions, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. Again, instructions, modeling, rehearsal, and feedback. And this type of supervision is extremely effective. We start out with instruction, which is really, we're teaching them, we're giving them that direct instruction. We're going to give them that literature and research review that they can possibly need. I remember my supervisor, she had this green book on functional analysis that was extremely effective that I always referred back to. So you're going to give them the tools that they need. You're going to instruct them. You're going to show them, you're going to teach them the different methods of how to use, of what to do in different situations. And then after teaching them, you're going to model for them how that should look like. They will observe you. You might show them videos. At this point, I have a whole library of videos that I have done since I've done a lot of trainings and workshops for the different paraprofessionals and the teachers and RBTs and other BCBAs in my school. A lot of times people don't have the time to actually come to observe you at certain times. And also I wanted to make sure that they were real and, in real time, that it's not something that I just walked in and grabbed a kid and let me just show you how to do error correction when I first needed to peer with that child. So, I'm lucky in the fact that I've worked with many of our students, a lot of our students. I was a teacher for 7 years in my school. So I had a lot of students that were my students. I already had that relationship with them. So I definitely have a lot of videos on different methods and you can show them. I have specific videos that when I'm teaching how to use, let's say the VB map, how to teach those skills and how to run a session with that. So I'll go into a classroom, show them a video, we'll talk about the video, and then afterwards come in again and again and train additionally. But those videos I've always heard were the piece that just brought everything together. So that's important. Modeling is crucial. Then you're going to have rehearsal where they're going to practice and do what you've shown them and what you've trained them to do. Let them get their feet wet right away after they've gotten that instruction. They want to show what they can do, especially if they have the experience or they're willing and they're ready to do it, and then giving them feedback. And I think that's the piece that we really, really need to focus in on, which is you're observing the supervisee. You need to review what they're doing and give them that feedback. It's crucial. The 4 steps of this: instruction, modeling, rehearsal, feedback. This is the basic. This is your playbook that you are going to be doing throughout your time supervising supervisees and RBTs. You're constantly going to be doing that. This is how you're going to teach RBTs. This is how you're going to teach paraprofessionals, right? You're going to show them how to do it. You're going to model. You're going to teach them how to do it, model for them, let them do it. You're going to watch them and then give them feedback on how they're done. So this is the basic piece of how to do it. And then actually, while you're observing them, you can observe them in person. While you're in person, a lot of times, a lot of supervisors like to script what they're seeing so they can go back and then show them what to do and give them that immediate feedback. You can also do it remotely. Sometimes it's nice to have that video that you have, and then you can sit down with your supervisee and go over it piece by piece and stop and pause and show them and say, hey, look at this. This is what you did really, really well. And this, maybe we could work on that next time, but look at that. You have that future reference to really go back to. And observations are crucial and they're really important to really guide you. I think the advice that I would give is don't overdo it. I think a lot of times we try to get it all in. I saw the way your error correction procedure wasn't, so on key, and that was the wrong prompting procedure here. But I really love the way you reinforced, that behavior, and you followed that method, to the T, and, et cetera, et cetera. It is so much for them to take in. And you want to really make sure to focus on the topic that you're working on and say, this is what we're observing today. Let's see how you did in this. What's unique about this situation? Observations are not only interactions with the students, but it's how they are interacting with everyone else around them. Obviously, you can take down points and refer back to it later, but you want them to be able to, you don't want to overwhelm them. You want to focus in on the feedback and then give them that immediately and say, this is what we're focusing on. So let's say you set up an observation with your supervisee, and that observation was going to focus in on how to reinforce, on a fixed schedule. So perhaps you have it set up that they are doing a discrete trial session and they are going to reinforce after every, third correct answer. And, but while you're observing them, you see that, perhaps they didn't prompt correctly, or they were reinforcing, they didn't give immediate reinforcement, they were reinforcing a different behavior. Now, some things are crucial and you have to mention, but you don't have to pick on everything right away, and you can skim over it and you can give them a good job, give them that good feedback, but then also really focus in on what you're looking at. And then come back to it at the end at a different time. And obviously, it can really go both ways, because a lot of times you will be observing, right? And they might say to you, show me how it's done. You're telling me that I didn't do this correct. Now you show me how it's done, which is great. And you want to be able to do that. So get ready to be able to do that, because that's important. That's the modeling piece. You want to show them how it should look like, but don't overdo it and making them feel, you want to teach them, but you don't have to make them feel that they are completely incapable. Give them little pieces of critique, and only focus in on one thing at a time. Don't overwhelm them at one point. So I would like to touch a little bit on, we've talked about what an observation would look like, where you can come in, you can sit near them. I don't always like to overwhelm the person that is being observed. I feel that sometimes it really distracts the student and the client as well. So it's good to come in, establish yourself as just a person in the environment that is just there, so that the student doesn't get distracted by you, and neither does the person that's being observed. If you are someone that's there constantly and someone that's there that is a part of the environment, it won't become a stressful situation. And the same thing goes with feedback. And that really brings me to that final piece over there when we're talking about BST, which is the feedback. And feedback is, I think, one of the most crucial pieces that you're going to have over here, because obviously you can train them, you can give them all the instruction, you can model for them, and they can then do it. But if they don't know what they did correctly or incorrectly, then it's useless. So feedback is important. You want it to be goal-oriented. You want it to be in a timely manner. But I think it can be written, it can be verbal. I had someone that said to me, they always leave and they right away send an email and they write back, I just observed you and this was so nice that I saw. And then sitting down with them at the time that you had set up, and then giving them that feedback, the more detailed feedback. And that's up to you. Obviously, you can set that up accordingly, but what is important is that it should be immediate. So if you have an appointment set up with them, on a Monday, don't do your observation the Monday before and you have a whole week in between to have them, sit back and stew on what they have done and not really sure what they did wrong or right. Sometimes just standing with them out in the hallway, giving them a quick, like that, and then setting them up 2 days later could work. But obviously we know that immediate is the most effective. So you want to start off with really being positive. It's important. We're not getting anywhere by being hard on people. It's not effective. We know this just from our behavior analytics skills. But we want to be positive right away. We want to be specific. You want to tell them, you want to explain specifically, yes, it was behavioral. You targeted that behavior. It was analytical. There was a functional relationship. You want to be very specific on what exactly you saw, and you want it to be immediate. It should be very individualized to what they did. It's individualized to the work that they did with the student, that it worked for that student, that it was effective. It was technological, that what they did could be replicated. The procedures were very systematic. It was very, very interesting because I watched this video given by Blinking. I'm blinking right now. But there was a video that a very prominent behavior analyst was speaking about giving feedback. And he said the first time that he was giving feedback, he was a mess, basically. He sat for an hour with his supervisee and was going on and on and on and on, barely giving time for his supervisee to speak. And at the end, the trainee said, okay, so you want me to do A, B, and C? All right, no problem. and he realized that he was so nervous, he didn't have to wait that long to get to the point, but it was critique. And obviously no one likes to give critique. But at the end of the day, critique can be sandwiched between positive and positive. It doesn't have to be so blunt. It doesn't have to be said in a way that makes the person feel inadequate. It could be said in a meaningful way, and we have to make sure that our feedback is meaningful. It should not equal stress. It should not be that thing where it's stressful for the person that's giving the feedback and the person that's receiving the feedback. If you have very set expectations that are set up before on how the feedback will be given and how and what they are, it shouldn't be a stressful experience, because you know that it will be. And you want to make sure you're constantly giving positive feedback and constructive feedback. It should be both. It shouldn't be one or the other, because there's always something constructive that could be said, and you're not doing anyone any favors by only saying positive and not giving anything constructive. So keep that in mind. You want to know if they met expectations, if they did not meet expectations. Sometimes it could be just a little bit of a change, something they could do a little bit better. We are all learners. We're all willing and wanting to learn and do better. That's part of our field, that's part of our profession. And we want to train our trainees to feel that same, the same way constantly. So by giving them that feedback and to understand that it's okay, they'll want to learn and do better. And obviously you're going to model for them how to give feedback and how to oversee other, ABA therapists and RBTs and paraprofessionals when they're BCBAs. When you're setting expectations for how the feedback should be received, the supervisor, you as a supervisor, you want to know that it was received. You want to know that they accepted it, not necessarily accepted it, but that they heard it and they know what to do next. And that there is open communication with that. A lot of times someone nods their head and they're saying, yes, yes. Have them repeat it back. Maybe you'll write up, okay, so this is what you're going to do for the next time. And then talk about how that will look like, so that you know that they've actually heard what you have said and what you have spoken about. And open communication will allow for all of that to happen. I think from everything that we have discussed, I want to leave off with one of the last things, which is, at the end of the day, we as supervisors, you're not only going to supervise one supervisee, you're not only going to be training one RBT, you're not only going to be working with one paraprofessional. This is constant, what you're doing constantly. And you want to make sure that what you're doing, that what you're setting up out there, that how you're supervising, whatever you're doing is successful, is effective. And the only way you can do that is by evaluating your success as a supervisor. Now, what's important is that besides for you giving ongoing feedback to your supervisee, you want to get ongoing feedback from your supervisee as well. There's that two-way street going on there. Because if you get that feedback from your supervisee and you hear from them what you're doing well, and they're repeating back to you, and they're able to actually implement what you're instructing and what you're modeling for them to do, just by observing that alone, you know that what you're doing is effective. But that has to be ongoing. You want to know that their needs are being met constantly. You have to have that conversation with them, and you have to be open to that. You have to allow for that. And if you need to be that person that, just like you want your supervisee to accept your feedback, you have to accept their feedback. I believe surveys are a great way at the end to really evaluate your success. You might want to ask close-ended questions and open-ended questions, but close-ended questions could really target specific areas on your organizational skills, on your goals, the knowledge level of yourself, about the setting, how the meetings occurred, how the feedback was, if the information covered was relevant to the clinical work. There's so many different areas that you could really target. And obviously, whatever survey you create, you can really make sure that it really is what you need. But you can also ask open-ended questions. You can ask, what did you like best about this specific thing? Especially if you have a specific area that you're really working with, you can really make sure to ask about it so that next time, did this work? Did it not work? You can ask, what could have been done differently. It's important to self-reflect. I think we as BCBAs, it's something that we do, we analyze, and it's important to do it for ourselves also. Were we that great BCBA that we want out of our supervisee? Did we supervise effectively? And we should do that self-reflection and have honest discussions. Perhaps even take data collection on ourselves in areas that we feel that we need to do better on. I think taking that survey that I had posted in the beginning, I'm posting it again on the form. You're more than welcome to use some of these questions and surveys that you create, but some of these questions could be used as a survey in the survey that you may want to use to really self-evaluate. Did you find, you can ask your supervisee, was your supervision experience meaningful and effective? And you can sort of play with it. I did the survey in Google Forms. It was a great way. They gave me different, I could choose if I wanted it to be a multiple choice question, if I wanted it to be a long answer, a short answer, if I wanted it to be, a more close-ended question, which was a great tool to use. You can ask them what they enjoyed most about their supervision, what they find challenging about their experience. Just to know if you really kept your time on task. You can ask if you had enough time for them. Maybe they felt that they really didn't gain everything that they had, and maybe you skipped meetings all the time. It's something that you could hear. I know I need to work on this a little bit better in the future. I ask a question if there's something that you did not receive from your supervision experience that you wish you did, so that I could know to cover it at the next time. Sometimes we don't think of something, or it didn't come up in that setting or in that experience. Something that is important, you want to know that you were able to answer all the questions or able to refer them to the proper resource to be able to answer all those questions. We're able to explain reasoning behind program implementation. Not to just say, just do it like that, because that's just the way you do it. Give them that explanation. Hands-on modeling. I found that in some of the replies that I had gotten to my survey was that people did not give hands-on, the hands-on modeling was not there, and they felt they really missed out on that. Were they goal-oriented? Did you feel that your supervisor was knowledgeable? Was your supervisor able to provide effective immediate feedback? And I like this question. If you're able to give one piece of advice to a future supervisor, what would it be? Because I feel like it would target something that you might not necessarily have thought of, but give you food for thought for as you supervise other supervisees. And obviously these are questions that you can add to, you can take away from, but I welcome you to use them. They're all great examples of, how you can self-reflect upon yourself and really try to come to an understanding, if you can really gain that, really honestly self-evaluate and say, did I do a good job here? Will I feel comfortable if that supervisee goes out in the world and becomes a BCBA? Would I refer clients to them? Would I hire them as a BCBA in my school? We want to make sure that we really, we're able to do that by saying that we did our job. We covered our role as a supervisor. And that really brings us to the end. I feel that, as supervisors, we have a big role and a big job. And we want to make sure that we cover everything, that we are there for our trainees, our RBTs. We are giving them the tools to really become effective BCBAs. And by doing that, we make sure that we are effective supervisors. And I hope that, what we cover today will give you some food for thought. We'll give you some practical tips on how to really make sure that, you establish really effective relationships with your supervisees, that you gain the outcomes that you really desperately need, that we mold only great BCBAs, that we fill the field with people that are effective and are, really make sure that any behavior analytic work they do is meaningful and relatable. I think then we've done our job. This was a great topic. I hope you've all enjoyed. I'm open and welcome if you'd like to contact me. If you have any questions, If you would like to further this discussion, you can contact me through email. I am more than happy to open a dialogue with you and hear your comments and suggestions. And I wish you all the most luck in your future, and I hope you enjoy becoming real effective supervisors.